There is a small tailor shop on Maple Street that has not turned a real profit in 11 years, and the woman who owns it could lock the door tomorrow, sit down in a warm chair, and finally rest. Everyone in town has told her so. Her own daughter has told her so, gently, more than once. But she will not close it, and the reason has nothing to do with money, and nothing to do with stubbornness either. The reason is written on the old cutting table at the back of the shop, in a few faded lines of blue tailor's chalk in a hand that stopped writing 11 years ago. Tonight, with the rain soft on the shop window and the streetlights blurred to gold, Ruth is going to be asked one last time to wipe that table clean. And what she decides to do will tell you everything about the kind of love that does not end simply because one of the two people is gone. Welcome to the Lamplit Hour, where every story is a small light left on for someone who needs it. If stories like this bring you comfort, take a moment to subscribe and stay a while. So settle in and let the rain blur the window, and let the little bell over the shop door hang quiet on its spring. Let me tell you about Ruth and Henry and the marks he left on the cutting table. Ruth had been the seamstress on Maple Street for almost 50 years, though for the first 40 of them, the shop had not been hers alone. It had been Henry's first. Henry the tailor, with his measuring tape always around his neck like a preacher's stole, and his stub of blue chalk forever behind his ear, and his way of looking at a man's shoulders and knowing without a word exactly where the jacket would need to give. They had met over a torn coat, of all things, when Ruth was 19 and had brought in her father's only good overcoat to be mended. And Henry had taken one look at her and sewn that coat so slowly and asked her to come back to check the fit so many times that her father finally said the coat had cost him 3 visits and a son-in-law. They were married within the year. They had run the shop together ever since, 2 pairs of hands at one long cutting table, for the better part of half a century. In the early days, it had been Henry's trade and Ruth's willingness, and he had taught her the way a patient man teaches the woman he loves, slowly and with great faith, and without ever once making her feel the size of what she did not yet know. He showed her how to read the grain of a cloth, how to find the true bias, how a seam wants to lie if you only let it. He showed her that you press as you go, never all at once at the end, because a garment is built the way a life is, one settled stitch at a time, and you cannot rush the pressing of either. She had been clumsy at first, and had wept once over a collar she had set in crooked 3 times, and Henry had taken the collar from her hands and unpicked it without a word, and set it down in front of her again, fresh, and said only, "Once more, you very nearly had it." That was the whole of his method for 40 years, with cloth and with people both. Once more, you very nearly had it. By the end, she was the finer needle of the two, and they both knew it, though he never stopped pretending to be the master, because it pleased her to be taught by him long after there was anything left to learn. It was not a grand shop. It had never been a grand shop. It was one narrow room with a big front window, a counter worn smooth as a river stone by 60 years of elbows, and shelves stacked with bolts of plain cloth, wool and cotton, and the sturdy gray gabardine that working men wore to church and to funerals and to the courthouse when they had to. There was an old treadle sewing machine that Ruth still preferred to the electric one, and a dress form in the corner that the grandchildren had named Mrs. Pruitt, for reasons no one remembered, and a cast iron radiator that knocked and hissed all winter like an old man clearing his throat. The floor was scuffed pine. The light was the soft yellow of a single hanging bulb, and whatever came through the front window off the street. It was in every way a modest place, but it had clothed an entire town for 2 generations, had let out the waistbands of men growing old, and taken in the dresses of women growing thin, had hemmed the trousers of boys for their first jobs and turned the collars of shirts so a family could get one more year out of them in the lean times. People did not come to Henry and Ruth's shop to be made fashionable. They came to be made to last. And in a small town, that is a deeper kind of service than fashion ever was. There were stories in that shop that no one would ever write down, and Ruth carried all of them. She could not look at a coat on the rack without remembering whose it was and why it had come in. There was the gabardine suit she had let out, inch by inch, for old Mr. Tomsack across 4 decades, as he went from a lean young clerk to a stout grandfather, and then taken in again all the way back in his last year, when the illness took the weight off him, so that he was buried in the same suit he had been married in, fitting once more the way it had when he was young. There was the wedding dress. She had altered for 3 different brides in one family. The grandmother's dress, made over for the mother, made over again for the daughter. Each time the same lace, each time a different girl turning in front of the mirror with her eyes shining. There was the winter the mill cut its hours, and half the town could not afford new clothes, and Ruth and Henry had quietly turned collars and patched elbows and charged almost nothing and never spoken of it, because a tailor who lets a family go cold to protect his prices is no tailor at all. The shop had held all of that. Every hem was a small history. Every let-out seam was a person growing older in a town that knew them. You do not get that from clothes bought cheap and thrown away. You only get it from a place that means to make you last. If this story is finding its way to you, a quiet light helps me keep the lamp lit for others. She thought often, in the quiet years, of one winter in particular. The winter the woolen mill at the edge of town cut its hours and then cut them again, and half the families on Maple Street went short. People stopped buying anything new that year, but clothes still wore out, as they always do, and children still grew, as they always do. And so the shop did not empty. It filled instead with mending, with coats whose linings had given way, and trousers worn through at the knee, and Sunday dresses that had to be made to last 1 more season, 2 more, 3. And Henry, who could read a family's circumstances from the state of a hem, the way a doctor reads a pulse, had quietly stopped charging what the work was worth. He charged what people could pay, which that winter was very little, and some weeks nothing at all. And when a proud man tried to insist, Henry would find some small flaw in his own work to apologize for and knock the price down on account of it, so that the man could leave with his dignity and his mended coat both. They had eaten thin themselves that winter. Ruth remembered it. But she also remembered that not one child on Maple Street went to school in a coat that let the cold through, and that Henry had said, on the coldest night of that year, warming his hands at the radiator, that a tailor who keeps his prices up while his neighbors go cold has forgotten what the needle is for. She had married a man like that. It had taken her most of a lifetime to understand how rare he was. Henry had died 11 years ago, in the autumn, quietly, of a heart that had simply done its full share of work and asked to stop. He had been at the shop that very morning. That was the thing Ruth came back to, again and again, in the years after. That on the last morning of his life, he had stood at the cutting table, in his shirt sleeves, marking out a pattern for a suit that the Lindqvist boy needed for his wedding. And he had hummed while he worked the way he always did, and he had pressed his blue chalk to the cloth and written, in his small, slanted hand, the measurements and the little notes to himself that he had written 10,000 times before. Sleeve 24.5. Taken 1 inch at the waist, he runs lean. Allow extra in the seat. Growing boy. And along the edge of the table, where the cloth had not quite covered it, he had jotted the date and a single word he always wrote at the start of a wedding suit, a small private joke between him and the table that Ruth had teased him about for 40 years. He wrote simply, "Lucky," because every groom, Henry said, was a lucky man, whether he knew it yet or not. And a tailor ought to remind him. Ruth had been across the street that morning at the grocer's, choosing apples of all the small, ordinary things to have been doing. She had looked back through the rain-flecked window and seen him at the table in his shirt sleeves, head bent, chalk in hand, and she had thought. She remembered thinking it, clear as anything 11 years on, that there was no finer sight in the world than her husband at his work in the yellow light of their shop. She had bought the apples. She had taken her time. There had been no reason to hurry. There had been no sign, no warning, nothing at all but an ordinary morning. And when she came back across the street with the apples in her bag and the bell rang over the door, the shop was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before, a quiet with a weight to it. And the kettle was just beginning to sing in the back, and she had known before she reached him. He was sitting in the old chair by the stove, very peaceful, as though he had felt tired and sat down for a moment to rest. The chalk was still warm smooth where his fingers had held it. On the table, the Lindqvist boys' cloth lay marked and ready, waiting for the hands that would not come back to it. Then he had set down the chalk and gone to put the kettle on, and that small last kindness, making the tea as he always did, so it would be ready when she came back, was the thing that undid her in the years after more than anything else. He had been thinking of her in his last few minutes. He had been making her tea. For 40 years they had worked at that long table, the two of them, in a kind of quiet that married people earn only after a very long time together. They did not need to talk much while they worked. Henry would lay out a pattern and Ruth would thread the machine, and a man's jacket would take shape between them through a whole afternoon with hardly a word spoken, only the small sounds of the shop, the scissors, the treadle, the radiator, the bell over the door. He chalked and cut. She stitched and pressed. He had the eye for a shoulder. She had the patience for a buttonhole. He told the same handful of jokes to every customer, and she laughed at them every single time for 40 years, not because they were funny, but because he was hers, and the laughing was a way of saying so. In the evenings, they swept up together and turned the sign to close together and walked home together down Maple Street. And it had seemed, for the better part of a lifetime, that it would simply go on like that. Two pairs of hands at one table until it was time for both of them to set the work down at once. It had not gone like that. It almost never does. One of them had to set the work down first, and one of them had to go on standing at the table alone. And Ruth had been the one left standing. She had finished the Lindqvist boys' suit herself. Of course she had. She had stood at that table with her own hands shaking, and she had cut along the lines Henry had drawn, following his marks, his measurements, his small slanted notes. And she had finished the suit and pressed it and hung it in its paper. And the boy had been married in it and had wept when he came to collect it because the whole town knew by then. And after the suit was gone, after the cloth that carried Henry's last marks had been cut away and sewn and sent out into the world on a young man's shoulders, Ruth had looked down at the bare cutting table and seen that some of his chalk had bled past the edge of the cloth and onto the wood itself, a few lines, a few numbers, and along the very edge, half worn even then, that one small word, lucky. She had not wiped it away, not that day, and not in the 11 years since. She kept it the way other widows keep a voice on an answering machine they cannot bear to erase, the way a person keeps the last grocery list in the familiar handwriting propped on the kitchen windowsill long after the milk and the bread are gone. It was not a shrine. Ruth was not a sentimental woman in the way that word is usually meant. She did not light candles to it or speak to it or make a fuss. She simply worked around it. She laid her cloth a little to the left so the marks stayed clear. She dusted the rest of the table and left that corner untouched. And 11 years of customers had come and gone. 11 years of hems and seams and let-out waistbands. And the whole time, just past the edge of her work in faded blue, were the last words her husband ever wrote. A sleeve length, a kind note about a lean young man, and the word lucky, written for a groom who was now 11 years married with children of his own. A day at the shop now had a slow shape to it that Ruth had come to love, even in the emptiness. She would arrive a little after 9 and turn the key in the old lock that always needed a small lift of the door to catch, and step into the cool, dim room that smelled of wool and machine oil and the faint sweetness of the chalk. She would turn the sign to open out of habit and a kind of faith. She would wake the radiator if it was winter and raise the front shade and let the morning light come in across the floor. And then she would sit at the treadle machine, and if there was mending, she would do it. And if there was none, she would simply put her hands to some small useful task, sorting buttons into their tins, winding bobbins, oiling the machine, the quiet maintenance of a life's tools. And the morning would pass, and the bell over the door would ring perhaps twice, perhaps not at all. People stopped in just to say hello to her now, more than to bring work. They brought her tomatoes from their gardens and news of their grandchildren, and she gave them a place to sit and the warmth of being known. The shop had become, without anyone deciding it, less a business than a kind of hearth on Maple Street, the last place where the old way of things still kept a small flame. And every day, just past the edge of whatever she was doing, in faded blue, were Henry's last words, keeping her company. The town had changed around the little shop the way towns do. The young people learned to buy their clothes cheap and ready-made and to throw them away rather than mend them. And that was not their fault. It was only the times. The orders slowed. Henry's pension and her own small savings covered what the shop did not, which was most of it now. And Ruth knew, the way you know a thing without letting yourself look straight at it, that she was not really running a business anymore. She was keeping a light on. She was opening the door each morning and turning the little sign to open and sitting at the treadle machine in the yellow light, mending what few things still came her way so that the shop on Maple Street would not go dark, so that Henry's table would not be sold to a stranger, so that the word lucky in his hand would stay in the world one more day. There is a particular loneliness to those years that Ruth never tried to explain to anyone because she did not think there were words for it that would not sound foolish. It was not the loneliness of the empty house, though that was real enough. It was the loneliness of being the last person who remembered. She was the only one left who knew how Henry took his tea and the song he hummed, and the exact way he tilted his head to look at a customer's shoulders, and the 10,000 small ordinary facts of a man that vanish from the earth when the one who loved him goes. As long as she opened the shop, as long as she stood at that table in the yellow light, she felt that some thin thread of him was still being held, that he was in some way she could not have defended to a sensible person, not entirely gone while his table still stood and his last marks were still on it. Other people kept photographs. Ruth kept a shop. It was an expensive way to keep a husband. Her practical self knew that. But the heart is not practical, and it keeps what it can, in the only ways it knows. It was her daughter Carol who finally said it plainly. Carol loved her mother and meant only good, and she had watched Ruth grow slower and the shop grow emptier for years, and she could not bear it any longer. She came one rainy evening near closing time, and she sat on the worn stool by the counter, and she said the things that loving, practical children say, that Ruth was 78, that her hands ached in the cold and the radiator barely kept up, that the building was worth something and the savings would not last forever, that there was no shame, none at all, in resting. A young couple wanted to take over the space. They would make it a little coffee shop, something warm, something the street could use. And they had asked very kindly whether the old tailor's shop might be available. They had asked Carol to ask, and the only thing standing in the way, Carol said, the only thing was the cutting table, which was built in and would have to go, and which would have to be cleared and cleaned for the sale. Ruth had known this conversation was coming for years. She had thought she was ready for it. But when Carol said the table would have to be cleared and cleaned, something in Ruth's chest went very still, the way the shop went still when the radiator finally stopped knocking on a winter night. If you are still here with me in the warm and the quiet, stay close. We are coming to the part that matters. Cleaned, Ruth said. Just cleaned up, Mom. Sanded, probably, and sealed. It's an old work surface. They'd want it nice for... Carol stopped because she had followed her mother's eyes to the back of the shop, to the corner of the table, to the faded blue mark she had walked past 1,000 times in her life and never once truly seen. Mom, she said, more gently, what is that? And Ruth, who had kept it to herself for 11 years, who had never made a fuss, found that she could not speak for a moment. Then she got up from the stool slowly, the way she got up from everything now, and she went to the back of the shop and turned on the small lamp over the table so that the marks showed clear in the yellow light. And she told her daughter what she was looking at. She read it to her, the way you read something written in a language only you still understand. Sleeve 24.5. Taken an inch at the waist, he runs lean. Allow extra in the seat, growing boy. And along the edge, the date, 11 years old now, and the word. Your father wrote that, Ruth said, on the last morning, the Lindqvist suit. He always wrote lucky on a wedding job. Everyone, 40 years of grooms, and he wrote it on every single bolt of cloth, where the boy would never see it, just for himself, just because he believed it. She touched the edge of the table, not the marks themselves, just the wood beside them, the way you might touch the frame of a photograph, rather than the glass. I finished that suit with his chalk still on the cloth, and when it was gone, this was what was left. This is the last thing he wrote, Carol, in the whole world. There's nothing else. His letters are gone, his lists, all of it faded or thrown out years ago without my thinking. This is all that's left of his hand, right here. And they want to sand it off and seal it over so a young couple can sell coffee. Carol had not known. That was the thing that struck Ruth, watching her daughter's face. In all the years of gentle, practical phone calls, in all the careful conversations about the building and the savings and the sensible thing to do, Carol had thought her mother was simply a widow who could not let go of a failing business, had thought it was grief making Ruth impractical the way grief does. She had never imagined that there was something real there, something specific, a few inches of faded blue chalk that were quite literally and exactly the last handwriting of her father left anywhere on the earth. Carol had been a girl in this shop. She had done her homework on that very table while her parents worked. She had been measured against the doorframe and scolded for playing with the pinking shears, and married herself in a dress her mother altered with her own hands. And she had walked past that corner of the table 10,000 times without ever seeing what was on it, because that is how it is with the things closest to us. We stop seeing them precisely because they are always there. Carol did not say anything for a long while. The rain ran down the front window and blurred the streetlights to gold. The radiator knocked twice and went quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the voice of the practical daughter on the telephone anymore. It was the voice of a girl who had just understood far too late and just in time what her mother had been quietly carrying alone for 11 years. And then Carol did the thing that told Ruth she had raised her daughter right after all. She did not argue. She did not say it was only chalk, only wood, only the past. She came to the back of the shop and she stood beside her mother and she looked at the marks her father had made on the last morning of his life. And she put her arm around Ruth's shoulders, and the two of them stood there in the lamplight and read a dead man's handwriting together, a sleeve length, a kind note about a lean young man, and the word lucky. And they both understood at the same moment that there was no coffee shop in the world worth sanding it away. "We'll keep the table," Carol said. "They won't want it," Ruth said. "It's built in. It has to go for the sale." "Then there won't be a sale," Carol said simply. "Not of this table." "We'll find another way, Mom. We always do. You taught me that." And then, after a moment, with the particular practicality of a daughter who has just decided something large, "We could cut it out, the corner, just this piece of the wood with the writing on it. Take it out clean and frame it, like a page, so it's safe, so it can't be worn away or sanded off, so you could hang it where you'd see it every day, wherever you are, and the rest of the table can go to whoever. But his hand stays with us." Ruth looked at her daughter and then at the marks, and she felt something she had not felt in 11 years of keeping the light on alone, which was the particular, unspeakable relief of no longer being the only one who knew. So that is what they did, not that night. That night, they only turned off the lamp and locked the little shop and went home together through the rain. And Ruth slept better than she had in a long time. But in the weeks that followed, a careful man with a fine saw came and cut a single clean rectangle from the corner of the old cutting table, the piece that held the last words Henry ever wrote, and it was sealed so the chalk would never fade further, and it was framed in plain wood that Ruth chose herself, nothing grand. Henry would have hated grand. And it hangs now in Ruth's front room, where the morning light reaches it, a sleeve length and a kind note and the word lucky in a hand that stopped writing 11 years ago, but did not, after all, stop speaking. She did close the shop in the end. There is no shame, none at all, in resting, and Ruth had earned it 10 times over. The young couple opened their warm little coffee place on Maple Street, and it is good for the street. And Ruth goes there some mornings and sits by the window with a cup she does not have to make herself, and the young people treat her like something precious because the whole town has told them whose shop it was. But she did not lose the things she had been protecting all those years. She had thought for 11 years that she had to keep the whole shop open to keep Henry's hand in the world. And it turned out she only had to keep the part that mattered and let the rest go gently, the way you must learn to do with so many things as the years pass. Sometimes in the front room, in the morning light, Ruth stands in front of the framed piece of pine and remembers the man who wrote on it. She remembers the way he believed that every groom was lucky, not as a tailor's flattery, but as a settled fact about the world, the way some people simply trust that things will come right. She had asked him once early on why he wrote it on every single wedding job when no groom would ever see it. And Henry had looked up from the cloth with the chalk behind his ear, and he had said that he did not write it for the groom. He wrote it for the cloth and for the work and for himself, to remind himself on every suit that he was helping to dress a man for the best day of his life, and that there was no small work in that, no matter how plain the gabardine or how lean the man's wallet. Anybody can sew a seam, he had said. The trick is to remember whose shoulders it's going on. 40 years later, alone at the table, Ruth had understood that he had been telling her how to live, not just how to sew. And she had tried, in the long years after, to remember whose shoulders everything was going on. The tomatoes from the gardens, the grandchildren's news, the young couple with their coffee dreams. Everyone who came through the bell-hung door was somebody's whole world, and Henry's last word on the table reminded her of it every single day. Lucky, they were all lucky, and so, it turned out, was she. So if you are lying there in the dark tonight, holding on to some whole large heavy thing because somewhere inside it is a small piece you cannot bear to lose, a house, a habit, a duty, a room you keep exactly as it was, let Ruth's table be a quiet word in your ear. You do not always have to carry the whole weight to keep the thing you love. Sometimes you only have to find the part that holds the handwriting and keep that and set the rest down and rest. The love is not in the wood. The love is in the hand that wrote on it, and that once it has been written on your life, no one can ever sand away. And perhaps that is the truest thing of all the true things in this little story, that for 11 years Ruth believed she was the keeper of Henry's hand, the lone guardian of it, the only one who knew, and the keeping had become a weight she did not know how to set down. But the moment she finally let another person see it, the moment she read those faded words aloud to her daughter in the lamplight, the weight changed. It did not vanish. Love's weights never vanish, nor should they. But it became something carried by two instead of one. And a grief shared is a grief halved, and a wonder shared is a wonder doubled. She had thought that letting someone in would mean letting Henry go. It had meant the opposite. It had meant that now there were two people in the world who knew that a man named Henry once wrote the word lucky on a tailor's table for grooms who would never see it just because he believed it. And someday Carol would tell her own children, standing in front of the frame pine in the morning light, and then there would be more than two, and the handwriting would go on speaking long after the hand, and the table, and the shop, and even Ruth herself were gone. That is how the things that matter are kept, not by one person holding on with both hands until they are too tired to hold anything at all, but by passing them gently from hand to hand down the long, quiet years. Ruth sleeps well these nights, in her small house, with the morning light waiting to fall on a framed piece of old pine that says a man once thought every groom was lucky, and that he was the luckiest of all. And we can leave her there, warm and unhurried, with the rain easing off the roof and the whole quiet town settling down around her. There is nothing left for her to protect. There is only the rest she has earned, and the handwriting on the wall, and the long good sleep of someone who kept faith with the one she loved. Thank you for spending this hour with me. If this story kept you company tonight, subscribe, and I'll leave the light on for you next time. Rest well.